AITA for not wanting to marry my fiancé until he stops paying for his adult child that lives in his home while he lives in my home for free. Child doesn't want to pay bills. When my fiancé and I first got together, things moved pretty fast. He ended up moving into my house, which at the time felt like a natural step forward for us. I have a nice place, comfortable, more than enough room for the two of us, and we were excited to start building our life together. At first, I did not really think much about the fact that he still had his house, or that his adult daughter and her young son were still living there. It did not seem like a big deal at the time. He had a daughter, she had a kid, and I figured she was just staying there temporarily until she figured things out. Fast forward a bit, and I started realizing that this was not a temporary situation at all. His daughter is in her 30s, early 30s to be more specific, and she has a very good job. I am talking about a career that brings in very solid income, probably even more than her father makes, if I am being completely honest. She is not struggling, she is not out here trying to make ends meet with a minimum wage job. She is doing really well for herself professionally. Yet despite all of that, her father is still paying for every single utility at that house. Water, gas, electric, internet, trash, everything. On top of that, he does not charge her a single penny in rent. Meanwhile, here he is, living in my house. He does not pay any of my bills. I am completely fine with that because it is my home, and I chose to have him move in, but when I see that he is still carrying all of the financial responsibility for another grown adult who should absolutely be standing on her own 2 feet by now, it starts to feel really unfair. It is not just about the money either. It is about what it represents. It feels like he is stuck in this caretaker role for someone who should have moved on from needing that kind of support a long time ago. I have adult children of my own. They have been out on their own for years. I raised them to be independent, to figure things out, to make their own way in the world. It was not easy. There were definitely moments where it would have been simpler for me to just swoop in and fix things for them, but I knew that would not help them grow. They had to stumble a few times, struggle a little bit, learn how to manage their own responsibilities. That is just part of becoming an adult. And now, they are strong, capable, independent people. I am proud of them for that. So when I see this situation with his daughter, it is really hard for me to wrap my head around it. She is not a teenager. She is not even a 20-something just getting started in life. She is a fully grown woman with a child of her own, a good job, and absolutely no reason to still be financially dependent on her father. Yet here we are. And it is not just utilities. If something breaks at the house, he pays for it. If there is a maintenance issue, he handles it. She just lives there, rent-free, bill-free, stress-free, while we are trying to plan a future together. I have brought it up a few times, gently at first. I tried to frame it in terms of our future. If we are going to build a life together, get married, merge our finances and responsibilities, then we need to be on the same page about boundaries. About what it means to be an adult. About what is fair. Every time, he just kind of brushes it off. He says things like, it is just until she saves up a little more, or, she has a lot on her plate with her son. I get it. Being a single parent is not easy. But it does not change the fact that she is more than capable of handling her own utilities, at the very least. It has gotten to the point where I am seriously reconsidering the wedding. I love him. I truly do. But I cannot shake the feeling that this situation is a huge red flag. If he cannot set healthy boundaries with his adult daughter now, what is going to happen after we are married? Am I going to be expected to just accept that part of our shared resources will always be funneled into maintaining her lifestyle? Am I going to be dragged into the role of being the bad guy because I think it is reasonable for a 30-something woman with a good job to pay her own bills? It is not even like I am suggesting he kick her out on the street tomorrow. I think he has every right to give her a reasonable timeline to move out if he wants to sell the house or rent it out for income. Or, if he wants to let her keep living there, fine, but she should at least be responsible for all the utilities and upkeep. I am not saying he should start charging her rent if he does not want to, but she should absolutely be covering the cost of the basics. That is what adults do. I know how this looks. I have asked myself 1,000 times if I am being selfish or unreasonable. I have questioned whether I am just being too rigid or judgmental. But every time I really sit with it, I come back to the same place. No one was there to keep paying my bills when I became an adult. No one was holding my hand and making sure everything was easy for me. I had to figure it out, and so did my kids. That is part of life. It is not about being cruel. It is about preparing your children to function in the real world. It is about setting them up for success, not dependency. I worry that if he keeps cushioning her from reality, it is going to do more harm than good in the long run. And honestly, it is already doing harm to our relationship. I have tried to be patient. I have tried to see it from all sides. But at the end of the day, I know what I want for my life and for my future marriage. I want a partner who is willing to prioritize the life we are building together. I want a relationship where both of us are carrying our own weight and not carrying people who are more than capable of standing on their own. So here I am, stuck in this limbo, questioning everything. I do not want to issue ultimatums. That is not who I am. But I also cannot ignore how much resentment is starting to build up inside me. I should not have to compete with a 30-something woman for my fiancé's financial attention. I should not feel like an outsider watching him pour his energy and resources into maintaining a separate household while we are supposed to be creating one together. I know this probably makes me sound harsh to some people. I know there are those who believe that family should always come first, no matter what. I get that. But I also believe that part of loving your family means encouraging them to be independent, strong, and self-sufficient. Not keeping them in a state of permanent dependency because it is easier than having hard conversations. I guess what I am really wondering is, does standing up for what I need in a marriage make me the asshole? Update 1. Well, a lot has happened since I last posted. Things reached a boiling point in a way I had both dreaded and known, deep down, was inevitable. After another long, tense evening where the air in the room felt so thick with unspoken words that I could barely breathe, I found myself unable to keep pretending everything was fine. I could barely hide my frustration anymore. Every smile felt fake, every casual comment felt strained. It was like we were dancing around a fire that was rapidly spreading, both of us pretending we did not smell the smoke. That night, after another one of those hollow conversations where Mark casually mentioned something about replacing the water heater at his old house, and yes, he said it like it was just another minor errand, as if he was not about to drop hundreds of dollars for someone who was fully capable of taking care of her own home, I finally could not take it anymore. My heart was racing, my stomach was tight, but I knew I had to press him. I had been tiptoeing around the issue for far too long, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the understanding partner, but the reality was that my resentment had grown into something I could no longer swallow down. I asked him, calmly but firmly, when he was planning to have a real conversation with Stephanie about setting boundaries. At first, he tried to dodge, like he always did. He shrugged and said it was not a big deal, that he was just helping out with a few bills. Hearing him say that, after everything, felt like a punch to the gut. It was not helping out. It was full-on financial support, the kind you give a child who has no means of providing for themselves, not a fully grown woman with a career, a son, and an income that likely eclipsed his own. I pointed this out, not harshly, but very clearly. I laid it out the way I saw it, that he was enabling her, that he was sacrificing his own financial security, and by extension, mine if we were to truly merge our lives, for someone who did not actually need it. I told him that what hurt me the most was not even the money, but what it symbolized, the fact that he could not set a healthy boundary even when it was damaging his present and future relationship. That he was so afraid of upsetting Stephanie that he was willing to upset me, the woman he claimed to want to spend the rest of his life with. I told him that if he could not even have an adult conversation with his daughter about basic boundaries, not even cutting her off financially, just transferring responsibility for the utilities and the upkeep of the home she lived in, then maybe we were not actually ready for marriage. I could see the words hit him like a slap. His face changed instantly. For the first time in all these months, I saw fear and doubt flicker across his expression. Real fear, not the annoyed dismissal I usually got when I tried to broach the subject. He tried to argue at first. Tried to tell me that he was just being a good father. That family helped family. That it was his responsibility to be there for her. It was the same tired refrain I had heard a dozen times before, but this time it sounded different. Desperate. Defensive. Like even he was starting to realize that the ground he was standing on was crumbling underneath him. I stayed calm. I did not yell, I did not cry. I just told him, quietly, that I loved him, but I loved myself enough too. I loved myself enough to know that I deserved a partner who could set healthy boundaries. A partner who could build a life with me without constantly reaching backward to fix problems that were not his to fix. I told him that it was not Stephanie's fault. It was his. He had allowed this dynamic to fester, and he was the only one who could change it. There was a long silence after that. The kind of silence that is not really silent at all, because you can practically hear the gears grinding in the other person's head. I watched him wrestle with it, saw the way he clenched and unclenched his hands, the way he stared at the floor like it might give him an easy answer if he just looked hard enough. Part of me wanted to fill the silence, to soften it, to rescue him from the discomfort. But I stayed still. I let him sit in it. I knew that if I bailed him out now, nothing would ever change. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, before he finally lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were tired, and there was a weight to his voice that had not been there before. He said he had been wrong to dismiss my concerns. That he had been so afraid of hurting his daughter, he had not realized he was hurting me. That he had been operating from a place of guilt, not reason. He admitted that he needed to be brave enough to have the hard conversations, even if they made him and Stephanie uncomfortable. He did not have a plan yet. He did not have the perfect words or the perfect timing. But in that moment, for the first time since we started this exhausting cycle, I felt a tiny thread of hope. Reluctantly, he agreed to talk to Stephanie. Update 2. Well, the conversation with Stephanie was a total failure. I had gone into it with a cautious, trembling kind of optimism, the kind you cling to when you're desperate for things to work out but are too afraid to admit how unlikely that really is. I had spent days preparing myself emotionally, telling myself that surely once things were laid out plainly, once the reality was presented gently and lovingly, she would understand. I told myself that any reasonable adult, when confronted with the truth of a situation that was clearly unfair and unsustainable, would have that moment of clarity. I imagined that she would have a flash of realization, that she would hear the words and see herself as if for the first time, recognize how much she had been leaning on her father and how inappropriate it was now that she was financially thriving. I thought there would be at least a glimmer of pride in her, a sudden rush of adult responsibility, the kind that makes you want to stand on your own 2 feet, if for no other reason than to show the people who supported you that their efforts were not wasted. I even prepared myself for awkwardness. I thought it might be tense, maybe a little uncomfortable, with some defensiveness at first, but ultimately a willingness to step up. I told myself she might feel embarrassed once it was pointed out, but that the embarrassment would be a catalyst for change, not a reason to dig her heels in. None of that happened. Mark approached her gently, almost painfully so, like a man defusing a bomb he was certain would go off if he so much as breathed the wrong way. Every word he spoke was coated in syrup, dripping with reassurance and praise. He started by telling her how proud he was of her success, how impressed he was by her career accomplishments, how amazed he was at the wonderful life she was building for herself and her son. He framed the conversation like it was a celebration, a testament to her strength and independence. He made it sound like the suggestion was the natural next step in a long list of achievements, a crowning moment that should have filled her with pride. When he finally got to the actual point, that now that she was stable, it was only reasonable for her to start covering her own utilities and basic maintenance costs at the house, he said it in the softest, most non-confrontational way possible. It was barely even a suggestion. It sounded more like a question he was afraid to ask. Stephanie's reaction was immediate and shocking. It was like a mask slipped right off her face. 1 second she was the sweet, easygoing young woman I had come to know, or thought I had, and the next she was someone else entirely. Her whole body shifted, her posture rigid, her face hardening into something defensive and unyielding. She did not miss a single beat before snapping back that she did not see why anything should change. Her voice was sharp, almost scornful, as she said, "Dad, you are doing fine. I am comfortable, my son is comfortable, and this setup works for us." The words hit the room like a slap. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no moment of reflection. It was immediate entitlement, an automatic belief that her comfort was justification enough to maintain a system that burdened someone else. Her tone made it clear that in her mind, the conversation was already over. There was no space for compromise, no space for understanding. She was not interested in fairness or adulthood or boundaries. In her world, things were good exactly the way they were, for her, and she had no intention of giving that up. I sat there, stunned, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mouth so dry I could barely swallow. I had never seen this side of her before. I had always thought, perhaps naively, that deep down she must know how strange and unsustainable this situation was. I thought that she must feel, at least sometimes, a flicker of guilt or discomfort about leaning so heavily on her father while living a financially independent life otherwise. I thought she would recognize the unfairness once it was illuminated for her. I thought she would care enough about her father's future, about the life he was trying to build with me, to at least meet us halfway. But there was none of that. No guilt. No shame. No embarrassment. Just a cold, almost casual entitlement, the kind that made it clear she felt owed this easy life. I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that this was not a misunderstanding. It was not immaturity. It was a choice. A deliberate decision to continue benefiting from her father's unwillingness to set limits, to keep taking because it was easier than standing on her own. Worse than her reaction was Mark's. That hurt far more than anything Stephanie could have said. He just sat there, looking completely defeated, like every ounce of air had been sucked out of him the moment she pushed back. His shoulders slumped forward, his face went pale, and he barely managed to say anything at all. He did not stand firm. He did not reiterate the need for change. He did not argue or insist or even clarify his point. He just folded. Like a crumbling house with nothing solid left to hold it up. He let the conversation die right there, unfinished, unresolved, abandoned like it had never mattered in the first place. Watching him retreat like that was gut-wrenching. It was not anger I felt in that moment, but a deep, hollow sadness, the kind that seems to settle right into your bones. I realized, with brutal clarity, that he was not going to fight for the boundaries we needed. He was not going to protect the life we were trying to build. He was not willing to risk upsetting her, even if it meant sacrificing the future we were supposed to be creating together. There was a long, heavy silence after that. The three of us sat there pretending like the conversation had not just shattered something fundamental between us. Stephanie, apparently satisfied that she had won, went back to scrolling on her phone like nothing had happened. She checked her messages, laughed at something on her screen, completely oblivious to the destruction she had just left in her wake. Mark stared blankly at the floor, lost in some internal battle he clearly had no intention of winning. I sat there frozen, staring at them both, feeling like I had just glimpsed a version of the future that made my skin crawl. A future where his daughter's comfort would always come first. Where hard decisions would always be avoided. Where my needs, my concerns, and our relationship would always take a back seat to keeping the fragile peace with someone who had no interest in contributing to her own independence. I could see it so clearly, like a movie playing out in front of me, year after year of quiet resentment, of being second place in my own marriage, of watching the man I loved sacrifice piece after piece of himself just to avoid an argument he was too afraid to have. The drive home that night was one of the longest of my life, even though it only took 20 minutes. The car felt suffocating, the silence between us so thick it almost seemed to have a weight of its own. Mark kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, little flickers of guilt and fear that he never voiced out loud. I kept my gaze fixed out the window, watching the darkened streets blur past, feeling each mile stretch out longer and longer inside my mind. I did not speak. I could not. What was there to say? The truth had been laid bare between us, undeniable and ugly. No amount of words could cover it now. He had shown me who he was when it came to setting boundaries with his daughter. And she had shown me exactly who she was when her comfort was threatened. There was no taking that back. No unseeing it. No pretending it had not happened. By the time we pulled into my driveway, my mind was already spinning in 1,000 directions, 100 futures flashing behind my eyes. I had to think about what my life would really look like if I stayed. Could I live with this endless, one-sided dynamic? Could I build a marriage on a foundation where another adult would be permanently tethered to us, draining resources without responsibility, without even a hint of gratitude? Could I respect a partner who was so paralyzed by guilt and fear that he would let his daughter steamroll over both of us, over and over again, without ever standing up? The answer was already forming inside me, heavy, painful, terrifying in its finality. I sat there wondering if I was about to walk away from this whole engagement. Update 3. After that disastrous conversation with Stephanie, I knew I could not just sit back and let it fester. I could feel the resentment building inside me like a slow, creeping poison. Every day that passed without action made me feel like I was betraying myself a little more, swallowing my own needs just to avoid rocking the boat. I realized that if I stayed silent now, if I allowed this situation to keep dragging on unchallenged, it would be the beginning of the end for Mark and me. It would be the rot in the foundation of everything we were trying to build. So I told Mark, as calmly but as firmly as I could, that we needed to have a sit-down, all three of us. No more sidestepping, no more pretending everything was fine, no more burying uncomfortable truths under a mountain of guilt and obligation. It was time to face this head-on, together, without flinching. I made it clear that this was not about anger or punishment, but about clarity and honesty. About setting the tone for the life we claimed we wanted to build together. To his credit, Mark agreed. I could see how hard it was for him, every line in his face tightened, every movement of his body radiated tension, but he agreed. I chose a coffee shop for the meeting, neutral ground where nobody could storm off too easily or escalate into shouting. It was a place where emotions would have to be tempered, where public civility might keep us from falling apart at the seams. When the day came, I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Stephanie arrived last, breezing in with a forced casualness that could not quite hide the flicker of defiance in her eyes. She sat down like she was doing us a favor, like this whole thing was an unnecessary inconvenience she would tolerate for a few minutes before going back to her comfortable, consequence-free life. I did not waste time. I laid it all out, clear and unvarnished. I said that I loved Mark, and that I wanted to marry him, but that I could not, and would not, enter a marriage where a significant portion of our future resources, our energy, our peace of mind, was tied up in indefinitely supporting another fully capable adult. I said that this was not about a lack of love for family, it was about setting healthy boundaries that respected everyone's independence and adulthood. I said that helping family meant teaching them to stand on their own, not keeping them stuck in a permanent state of dependence because it was easier or because it made someone feel needed. Stephanie immediately tried to argue. Her voice was sharp, her body language defensive, her words brimming with the same entitlement I had seen before. She said she should not have to worry about bills because family helps family. She said that it was his house, his choice, and if he was fine with it before, why should anything change just because of me? I stayed calm. I told her bluntly that families help each other grow, not stay stuck. I said that real love, the kind that builds strong, resilient people, does not come from shielding someone from responsibility but from trusting them to handle it. I said that continuing to rely on her father for basic living expenses when she was fully capable of supporting herself was not a gift she was giving him, it was a burden she was refusing to acknowledge. There was a long, tense silence after that. I could feel Mark sitting beside me, the conflict radiating off him like heat. For a moment, I thought he might shrink back again, retreat into that old, familiar posture of avoiding confrontation at any cost. But then, something shifted. I saw it happen, the way his shoulders squared, the way he lifted his head, the way he looked at Stephanie not with fear or guilt, but with the steady, painful resolve of a man who had finally reached the edge of what he could carry. He told her, in a voice that was steady and sure, that he loved her deeply. That he would always love her. But that he was about to start his own new family, and that meant building a life with new priorities, new commitments. He said that part of growing up, truly growing up, meant stepping into your own responsibilities, not relying on someone else to carry you indefinitely. He told her that she had 60 days to either take over all the utilities and upkeep of the house herself or find her own place to live. Stephanie was furious. I saw it flood her face in an instant, the disbelief, the outrage, the betrayal she felt boiling over. She stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing looks from a few nearby tables. Without another word, she grabbed her things and stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving a trail of shocked silence in her wake. I sat there for a moment, stunned but oddly weightless, like a heavy coat I had been wearing for months had just slipped from my shoulders. Mark sat too, staring at the door she had slammed behind her, his face a complicated map of grief and relief and exhaustion. Later, in the quiet of my living room, Mark admitted to me that he had been terrified of disappointing her. That he had spent so many years trying to shield her from every hardship that he had not realized he was doing more harm than good. He said he thought he was protecting her, but really, he was holding her back. And he realized now, finally, that true love sometimes meant allowing the people you care about to feel discomfort, to struggle, to face the consequences of their own choices. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Mark and I are back to planning our wedding, for real this time, with both of us fully committed to building a future together without unfinished business hanging over us. It is not the smoothest journey. It has not been painless. But for the first time, it finally feels like we are heading in the right direction, together, both of us standing on solid, shared ground.